This is Marlin Simon, continuing my stories of duck soup and how easy things go. I was reminiscing about my college experience. After I'd gotten out of the Navy, I was in the Navy for a couple of years and got an early discharge to be able to go to college. And I got discharged in the Mediterranean, high-lined off the aircraft carrier onto a ship, and then ended up back here in the States. And the day I got back, I was already 3 days late for University of Miami. I went over there and immediately jumped right into college. But I was doing well, but not as well as my parents thought I had to do, and I was still living at home in Miami at the time. And they thought I had to go to school where my sister was. She was at Florida Southern College in Lakeland. So they made arrangements for me to get plugged in up there, and I ended up getting there. It was an interesting story because my name Marlin was not a normal one. Back in the day, Marlin was never even heard of, and the fish was not that popular at the time. So I went to Florida Southern College, and I said, here I am, and they gave me all this paperwork and said, here's the dorm you're assigned to. So I went there, went to the dorm, found out it was the women's dorm. And I got there, and the house mother went bananas. I said, look it, this is where they put me. I've got to go here. Here's my room number and everything. Well, of course, you can imagine that it didn't go over real well at a Methodist college, and they had very strict rules, and the girls had to be in at 8 o'clock at night and all this kind of stuff. And it was fun harassing the people there. But anyway, I ended up in a dorm and got to know some guys. I ended up pledging a fraternity, Pi Kappa Phi, and I still have many friends right now, lifelong friends that I met in college. But one of my good friends was Lou Sanchez, who passed away now probably 30 years or so ago. But Lou was an incredible artist. He had so many multi-talented facets of him, and he was suggesting one day that we build a totem pole for our fraternity. Everybody had something on campus that had something representative of their fraternity or sorority. And he said, why don't we build a totem pole? I said, I don't know anything about it. He said, well, I'll teach you. So we ended up getting the fraternity to bring us a 23-foot, actually it was 30-some foot, but we put 6 foot in the ground. So we ended up with a 23-foot totem pole. We started carving it with hatchets and chisels. And before we finished it, Lou graduated. And the next year, I ended up finishing the totem pole, and we had a fraternity crest on it, and then we had some kind of bird on the middle of it, and all painted up and that stuff, and we plunked it out in front of our fraternity house. Well, that caused a whole bunch of different interesting things. We had one fraternity came over and said they were going to cut it down. So we ended up putting a steel guard around the thing with rebar, and then we put it over the top of the pole and put it down into the ground so they couldn't get that out, and you couldn't get a chainsaw to it. Well, then we had a group that came over and painted it. Well, we had it painted a couple times, and I found out who did it. I understood which fraternity did it, and they actually had a concrete lion out in front of their fraternity house. So at 4 o'clock one morning, I got some of the guys together, a whole bunch of tires, and we put tires, old tires, all over this lion, and then I put lighter fluid on it and lit the whole thing. We vulcanized their lion, and the next morning it was just covered in rubber that had melted all over the thing. Nobody had gotten up, nobody knew it was on fire, and we never heard anything much more about about that group. But during that whole time, Lou taught me how to carve, and people saw the totem pole, and that it ended up in the local paper, the Lakeland Ledger, and people said, would you carve me a totem pole for my business here and that. So I started carving smaller poles, you know, 10 foot high, that type of thing, with a bird on top and all painted up. And it was, people would look at it and want to, what's this business all about? Well, as we were doing that, we started playing with the ideas of Polynesian tikis. And Lou had already graduated, so I started carving these little figures, sometimes 3 foot high, sometimes 6 foot. And then I got some books on Polynesian carvings and so on. Long story short, I ended up managing a landscape nursery and carving tikis and totem poles. And then after that nursery didn't work out real well because I wasn't making enough money at it, I moved my wife and business down to the Keys, and started out in Islamorada on the side of the road carving tikis and doing them out of coconut palm. And over the years I carved between 7,000 and 8,000 tikis, and in doing that I was perfecting the art of carving them. I was doing some very good work compared to much of the crude ones that are being made now. They just make them with a chainsaw and rough them out. And along with that, I was carving very specifically fishermen's gods, war gods, and stuff like that. And I was carving one day at Holiday Isle, actually, and I was reading the Bible, and I'm carving away, reading the Bible, and it said, "Those who carve idols." And I went, "Ah!" And God grabbed me right there, and I said, "God, if you don't want me carving anymore, I'd be happy to quit, but you're going to have to provide for me." And I came home that night, and the phone rang, and somebody said, "Would you build a dock for me?" I went, "Yeah," because I was doing side jobs, just carving all day long. I was carving roughly 12 to 14,000 strokes with a mallet and chisel. So this arm was 3 inches bigger than this arm because of the, and a side note there, I could arm wrestle anybody. I don't ever remember being beat arm wrestling because this little guy, me, his muscles were so tight. Bam! Anyway, long story short, I got the second phone call 15 minutes later, and somebody said, "Would you put a deck on my house for me?" I went, "Yeah, I can get around to that." Well, a half hour later, the phone rings, and somebody said, "Would you put an addition on my house for me?" I said, "I got it." And the guy said, "What?" I said, "I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to God." So the next morning I went down, completely shut my shop down, gave all my stuff away, and have not carved a tiki or totem pole in the last, must be 38 years, something like that. But that was an interesting area of my life, interesting time. God had a better plan. I realized that I was carving things that were not according to His Word, and I didn't want to be doing that. So I quit my carving in that sense. But now, since that time, I've gone into turning stuff on my lathe. I still love to work with wood, and I'm always playing with something or other, either building a little shed for somebody or whatever it is. But along with that, I ended up becoming a building contractor. When I quit all that, I started building things, docks and decks. I was known for my chainsaw and sledgehammer, and I would help friends of mine build stuff. I ended up, good friend was building homes out in Colorado. I went there. I spent a time in Minnesota building. I built 4 log homes, and another close fraternity friend of mine in Banner Elk, North Carolina, said, "How about coming up here and building a 4-story craft shop for me?" So we put it together, built it. Every night we come in, eat dinner and say, what are we going to do next? Well, let's go and do this and that. The craft shop is still there, and it's been there for over 40 some years now. But tikis and totem poles were a very interesting part of my life. I used to go to the shows. They used to pay me to go to the Southern Christmas show in Charlotte, which was a very big one in the South. And often I was put on television because I would carve and demonstrate while I was there doing the work with them. And people would love to just stand around and talk and see what was going on. Had many interesting experiences with those. I remember one day I was carving on the side of the highway down here, and people in the Keys back in the early 60s, basically everybody knew everybody. And this guy, a tourist, came by and stopped, and he was one of those tourists that kept talking. And and I would tell him what I was doing, how I was doing, and one of those kind of guys never seemed to want to shut up. And another car stops, and guy walks over and said, Marlin, would you build me a big tiki with roots, the roots coming up for the hair and regular thing, and big around as you can get a coconut palm. And I said, yeah, I know exactly what you want. You know, grab a coconut palm, pull it out of the ground, all the roots that are sticking on it all stick up, and make a big face on it. He said, I want as big a one as you can get. And I said, okay, it's going to take a while. Well, this guy, this one that's been talking at me, says, did anybody ever tell you look like Ted Williams? And he went, yeah. And he started walking to the car. And I said, well, I'll get with you whenever I get it. And he said, okay, we'll catch you later, Marlin. And this guy is walking with me as I'm walking to the car. And the guy gets in the car and takes off. This talking guy says, that guy really looked like Ted Williams. I looked at him, I said, well, it ought to, it was. And he went, really? And he jumped out. He went right out on the highway, and he's going, hey, Ted, I'm one of your fans. This is incredible. I always wanted to meet you. And Ted took off. Wild little things like that, but it was really funny to see how people are so bananas over what they think and believe and where they're at. But a lot of little experiences like that. I just think of another quick experience. When I got into the turtles, I was still carving a little bit here and there at that time. And I was still carving. And I was down in Costa Rica, and there was a big log that floated up on the beach, and I had a chainsaw with me, and I went and carved a big, about 6 or 8 foot tiki with big slanted eyes and a frown on its face and that kind of stuff, and I set the thing up. Well, I didn't realize the culture down in Costa Rica and the people down there, they were fairly backward, not really tuned up. And the next day, I saw the paths of people that walked down the beach, and they went way out into the water around this tiki I put up. But anyway, I apparently freaked some people out doing that, but it was an interesting experience. But God got hold of me many years later, and I realized that I didn't need to be carving tikis and totem poles, so I quit. And since that time, I've had an incredible life, pastoring a church for 35 or 34 years now. And God had a better plan. But He takes us through situations in our lives and times where He takes care of us, watches over us, and yet allows us to do dumb things, but then gets the glory out of it, because I've been able to witness to people how God has changed my life through what He did and how He allowed it to happen. And that we don't need idols in our lives, but we need Jesus. And it's the basic bottom line for all of us.